Go, folks. Grab onto your lean rails. We're about to break the time barrier.
We are now conducting our final systems check. Please stow all carry-on items in the under-seat compartment.
I have travelled through time as often as you have travelled from the Earth to the Moon, sir. Yes.
Easy, boys. Too much coffee?
They say we are birds of a feather. We're happy amigos, no matter where he goes. The 1, 2, and 3 goes. We're always together.
Now listen, you bird brains. If you're gonna keep your jobs, you gotta get hip. I know all about it, see?
Step inside our storybook. Imagine what's in store.
WDW Radio, your information station.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the WDW Radio Show, your Walt Disney World information station. I am your host, Lou Mangello, and this is show number 225 for the week of June 4th, 2011. In Walt Disney World, the concept that everything speaks holds true not just for attractions and shows, but restaurants, environments, and even the resorts. And with that, it means that everything you see and encounter tells a story, and every detail has meaning, even in places you might not otherwise expect. And that holds true for the Walt Disney World Swan and Dolphin. And this week, we'll take a very close look at the interesting history of these resorts, their theming, secrets, and myths that surround them as well. It's a fascinating look into two buildings with a deeper Disney connection and story than you might expect. Stay tuned for some information about upcoming meets, including our fundraising for Japan, before I play some of your voicemails at the end of the show. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of the WDW Radio Show. As I'm wandering here on the promenade in front of Disney's Yacht and Beach Club Resort, and I look across Crescent Lake to the beautiful boardwalk across the way, I'm reminded about how everything, and I tell you this all the time, in Walt Disney World has a reason and has a story behind it. And certainly that holds true for these hotels, for Epcot Center behind us, and the boardwalk across the way. But off in the distance, I look across over the bridge, and I see two buildings that, to a lot of people, probably have no story, and for even more people, probably don't know the history, and that is, of course, the Walt Disney World Swan and Dolphin Hotels. And surprised as you might be, they too have a fascinating history and a story behind them as well, and also one that's surrounded by myths and urban legends. But joining me today is a man who is not a myth and is truly a Disney legend. He is, of course, our good friend, Jim Korkis. Welcome back, Jim.
Yes, let me get that $25 out of my pocket to give to you right now. Thank you very much, Lou. Always a pleasure to be on this podcast. And again, as you say, the Walt Disney World Swan and Dolphin are a significant part of Walt Disney World property, and yet, in a way, they aren't. And so I'm anxious to talk about it today, and we've got a special guest that's going to be helping us, too.
We do. All the way from the frozen tundra of somewhere near Chicago, Illinois, is a man who knows a lot about Walt Disney World and Disneyland history, because he is the founder of Yesterland.com. He is, of course, Werner Weiss. Werner, welcome to the warm Florida sun, to the boardwalk, and to the show.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Lou. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on WDW Radio for the first time ever.
Well, this should be a lot of fun, and we've talked about this before. I've talked about the Swan and Dolphin in the past, and you know what sort of started to prompt this discussion was something that I think each of us has experienced before. It's that exposure to some of these Disney urban legends, some of these myths. We've heard them from friends. We've also heard them sometimes from cast members, and a lot of those sometimes surround the Swan and Dolphin. And in addition to that, I think a lot of people, and this is how I sort of preface this discussion, don't realize that, like everything else we see here,
these two resorts have a story behind them, a very, very detailed story that for the most part has been lost over time. Most guests don't recognize. But I think, too, I want to go back a little bit farther because I think it's important that we understand why these hotels are here, what the relationship is to Disney, and how they came to be in the first place, because that, too, is a fascinating story in and of itself.
Yes, and Werner, didn't this all start even before Michael Eisner and Frank Wells came on board?
Well, let's talk about when Frank Wells and Michael Eisner came on board in the mid-1980s. At that time, Disney had 3 hotels here in Florida. They had the Contemporary, the Polynesian, and the Disney Inn, which was actually in those days still called the Golf Resort, and today is shades of green. But there were 2 hotels in the planning stage that the old management, the previous management had in planning stages. One was the Grand Floridian, and there had already been work done, but and in fact it would not open until after Wells and Eisner came in, but it predates their arrival. And the other is that the Disney company had a deal with Tishman Hotels, which was owned by Tishman Construction, the company that was the general contractor for Epcot Center. And the idea was that Walt Disney World would be a good place for conventions, but the Contemporary had a rather small convention facility. Disney World needed a real convention center. And Tishman was going to build a hotel with a 1,500-room Sheraton hotel and a 700 and some odd room Crown Plaza hotel. It was going to be located over at Hotel Plaza, where the Hilton and those other hotels are today near downtown, near what's now called Downtown Disney. And that was all in the works, but then with the arrival of the new management team, things happened.
And the idea of a convention center is something that, was something that even Walt looked at very early on.
You're absolutely right, Lou. If we take a look at that hand drawing that Walt did of Epcot property, it very clearly states, convention facilities. And, of course, when Magic Kingdom and the rest of Walt Disney World opened in 71, that was really just phase 1, so convention facilities really weren't there at that time. And John Tishman was very clever. He went and he did a study, and he found that in those days, believe it or not, only 2 out of every 5 people that came to Walt Disney World were children. Most of them were adults, and he saw this wonderful opportunity for conventions because the biggest competitor at that time was Las Vegas, and that wasn't family friendly. You can't say to the wife and kids, why don't you go play the slots and go see a strip show, and then I'll meet up with you later. And so here at Walt Disney World is a wonderful opportunity to expand that convention business. And so when Michael Eisner and Frank Wells came on board in 1984, actually the second day that he was here, according to the book Building a Dream by Beth Dunlap, is that Michael Eisner had a sleepless night. And he wasn't worried about animation. He wasn't worried about live action films. He wasn't worried about the parks. What he was worried about were these gosh darn hotels that Tishman were going to do. Isn't that true, Werner?
Yes, but it took about a year until things really started changing in that regard. It actually turns out that in around 1985, they had the official groundbreaking for the hotels that I was mentioning earlier, the Sheraton and the Crown Plaza. But real construction didn't start. Then fast forward to 1986, and there are press reports in places like the Wall Street Journal that Disney is about to make a giant deal with Marriott Corporation. And in fact, the 3 hotels that I mentioned earlier are going to become Marriott-managed properties. Marriott is going to build about 20,000 additional rooms on property. And the Marriott Orlando World Center, that's that big complex on the other side of I-4, would be annexed into Walt Disney World through the magic of the Reedy Creek Improvement District and the semi-governmental powers that Disney had through that entity.
And that probably didn't make Tishman happy at all, right?
And Tishman said, wait a minute, I thought I had the 10-year contractual exclusive deal to be able to build convention hotels, starting with the ones that I mentioned, but additional ones as needed. And where in the world is Marriott coming from doing this? So Tishman said, we are stopping work on the hotel. Not that it had ever really started work on it yet, but they stopped it. and instead started working on lawsuits. And so the lawsuit, the first one, was over $300 million in...
Actually, yes. They filed a $371 million lawsuit, which would sort of cover, their investment and all that. Plus, they were asking for punitive damages, and so that ran it over $1 billion. And in fact, Disney Legal went to Eisner and said, unless you happen to have an extra $1 billion or $2 billion hanging around, you might want to go back and talk to these folks here.
Eventually what happened is that Disney decided to go it alone. They decided not to go with Marriott, and they really didn't want to go with Tishman either, but there was still that nasty little business of the contract. So the way they got around that is to work out a new deal with Tishman, and it actually took a couple of years before anything was announced. And Jim, maybe you can talk about some of the things that happened, how that hotel over by Hotel Plaza, the Crown Plaza and Sheraton, suddenly turned into this hotel that we see over here in the distance.
And in fact, you're right. Those press releases describe this area as the Disney Center. And that's how it went out in all the publicity. This was the Disney Center because it was right next to Epcot Center. And in fact, Charlie Ridgway, who I love dearly, and if you guys don't have his book, Spinning Disney's World, go out and get yourself a copy. And he was the publicist, and he said that there were going to be boats and ferries that would take people from these two large hotels right into the central lagoon of Epcot. And so maybe that was one of the reasons for some of those boat docks in World Showcase as well, is you'd just go over and you'd hop off at Morocco or whatever.
But these hotels, too, initially did not look like the giant swan and the dolphin we have today, too.
Exactly. The original hotel, and one of the reasons that Michael Eisner, who is a big architecture buff, did not like them is they looked like refrigerator boxes. They were apparently ugly boxes, thus the sleepless nights that Jim was referring to. And by the time the swan and dolphin were announced, the architect had become Michael Graves. And there's an interesting process of how that came to be, and Jim is the world's expert on that.
I wish I were the world's expert. Actually, Tishman's architect, who had been working on this project right from the beginning, was Alan Lapidus, who really doesn't get enough of the credit. Of course, on the reverse, he doesn't get any of the blame either. But he had come up with those designs, didn't like that, and what happened is... Michael Eisner approached other architects like Robert Venturi, and he was going to have Robert Venturi team up with Michael Graves. And what did Venturi say about that? That it was like putting together George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, right?
And Eisner, I guess, countered that, yes, in fact, he had put those two together on Raiders of the Lost Ark.
So there was literally a competition to come up with designs for these buildings. And so Lapidus was in the running, and he came up with this beautiful design for like a crystal palace, which was beautiful. But again, it was fairly standard. And Michael Eisner, and this is a direct quote from Michael Eisner, I have this on video, where he says it takes just as much money to build a great building as it does a dumb one. He is so articulate. Michael Eisner was so articulate. And so he wanted some, and so Michael Graves came in with a concept where there was a flat side and then a slope, and then there was a round sphere right smack dab in the center. And Imagineer John Hench, who is very, very knowledgeable about architecture and all that, realized that was an homage to actually a French funeral monument. So he looked over at Eisner and he says, that ought to kill 60 years worth of goodwill that the Disney company has. And but Michael Graves also had a sort of a pyramid shape with a huge fountain on top, and Robert Venturi basically decided to pull out from the competition. He didn't want to work with other people, and they took a look, and they liked Michael Graves, although basically Eisner says, lighten that up, and we're going to team you up with Alan Lapidus. And they figured Lapidus would just be incensed and walk away. Well, Lapidus had been working for several years on this project without any money coming in, and he had an entire company, he had staff, and so... yeah, this was fine. And so he and Michael Graves actually got along very well together. He said Michael Graves had a wonderful sense of humor, but people really didn't get it, which we see in the resorts here. But he said that also Michael Graves would continually trash and joke about Disney until Michael Eisner came in the room, and then he was all politically correct. And they did a lot of their work. They did a lot of their original sketches at the Beverly Hills Hotel, which at that time had giant banana leaves on the wallpaper there as part of the print.
I want to sort of ask you guys a question. Certainly, none of us were there in the room. It would have been interesting to be a fly on the wall. But when we go back and look at those original design, those square refrigerator boxes, and some of the other concepts, the triangle with the sphere in it, what we have today, I think a lot of the questions that guests always ask, and you have to ask at the very beginning, why were these hotels going to be so very different from the well-themed resorts that we had, like a Polynesian, like a Fort Wilderness, even a golf resort? Everyone had a sort of a Disney touch to it. Why were these so very different?
Well, in one sense, they aren't different in that they all represent entertainment architecture. And it's just that Michael Graves' vision of entertainment architecture is very different from the themed resorts. That if you think about what's up by the Magic Kingdom, the Contemporary is not really terribly themed. It was modern, considered futuristic perhaps in 1971, quickly ceased to be futuristic, but still is a kind of a unique place. Polynesian was certainly very nicely themed, and I think most people I think have seen plans or drawings for the Asian and the Persian, Venetian, some really cool hotels that were planned. So the original vision was to go with that type of a theming. But again, when Michael Eisner came on board, and he was this architecture buff, the architect is the star, just the same way that a movie star is the star or a star director. And you don't necessarily tell a star director what to do. And Eisner loved the design that Graves came up with for the Swan and Dolphin.
So you think really this is very much an Eisner, this was his, he wanted to sort of punctuate his own design and put his own mark on where the direction of the resort construction was going.
Absolutely. Michael Eisner has gone on record as saying that the two legacies he feels that he's going to leave with the Disney company are culinary, the improvements of culinary on property, which I certainly think happened, and entertainment architecture, which I think happened as well. And Michael Graves was the first, as Werner said, the first star, the first big-name architect that was going to be involved. And in fact, Eisner had set a stipulation that the hotels could not be any taller than 8 stories because it would interfere with sight lines elsewhere on property. And we all know that the Dolphin ended up about 27 stories high, and the Swan maybe about 12 there. And the reason for that is because that's what Michael Graves wanted, and Eisner wanted to send that message to other architects that, yes, you could work with Disney, that you didn't have to design a resort in the shape of Mickey Mouse and all of that, that we will work with your vision. And that's exactly what happened. So you're bringing in people like Robert Stern and Robert Venturi and Arado Isesaki and all of these terrific ones, because they're seeing how he's treating Michael Graves, which is basically giving him a blank slate. But Michael Graves had never designed a hotel before. And so that's why he's teamed with Lapidus, because it's going to have the look of Michael Graves, but it's going to have that functionality that Lapidus brought to all of his projects. One of the reasons Tishman loved him is he brought things in on budget, and he brought things in that were functional.
Speaking of Tishman, as we said, Tishman is still involved at this point. In fact, Tishman is building this instead of the hotels that he had originally planned. But his reaction to the design by Graves was a little different than what Eisner said. Tishman is quoted in the book Disney War by James B. Stewart as saying, "This design is outrageous and impossible. The buildings make no sense practically or economically." But I guess Eisner won, and Tishman went ahead with it, and it was pretty well designed as Graves planned it and as Eisner approved it and wanted it.
I think that a lot of guests, and we'll talk about this later on, I think a lot of guests probably feel more towards Tishman than they do Eisner, because I think it's a very interesting choice as to the time and place for Eisner to say, okay, architect, why do it in a hotel right in the middle of, right next to Epcot Center, as opposed to a corporate, an office building, a Team Disney building, a casting building, whatever it is.
And again, Michael Eisner had just come on and Imagineers, well, everyone was trying to bring him up to speed. Animators were trying to explain to him how animation was done because he just did not get storyboards. How do you tell a story through storyboards? Give me a script. I understand story arcs and all that. Same thing with Imagineering. They're going in and they're trying to explain to him, this is the process, Michael. And of course, Michael was brought in to turn all of that up on its ear there, for that to happen. And he was. Michael Graves was very charismatic, and what he did, and they learned this later from working with other architects, is Graves never brought in models. He'd come in and he'd talk about the history of architecture, and he'd have mood lighting in the room and all this, and so everybody, it's almost like, and this will be just wonderful, and there'll be this, and there'll be this feeling, and all of this goes around. Now, one of the things that he sold to Michael, and this is interesting because this is not written down anywhere. This was not shared with cast members. The reason I know this is I was an animation instructor at the Disney Institute in 1996. One of the guest speakers there at the Performance Center was Michael Graves. And one of the things that we did in the animation team is when we had speakers like that, is after their presentation, we'd invite them over to Seasons, which was the restaurant up there, either for a bite to eat or a cup of coffee or dessert or something like that. And so we had Michael Graves there, and we were pumping him with all sorts of questions. And he said, oh, well, yes, don't you see the story for this? With the dolphin, what that is there's been this earthquake. This I wanted to create this feeling, this tropical feeling, and all of this. And so there's been this earthquake and whatever. So this mountain under the water has thrust its way up. So it's created this island. That's why there's banana leaves along the side there. And the dolphins have been thrust high into the air. That's why those are. And then what happened is that black box is the heart of the mountain. And this has been so traumatic that what happens is the heart has burst open and the water spills out down those clamshells into that fountain, and then it flows over to the Swan. And you'll even see the railings are done up like water going towards the Swan. And when it originally opened, there was even landscaping on that pathway there that curved, so it looked like, yes, waves, and it splashes up on the Swan, and two swans have alighted to see this magnificent event, and they are transformed into stone. And this is how Michael Graves pitched this to Eisner and the rest of the Disney executive team, and they said, this is wonderful. Everything speaks. Imagineering has told me that everything has a story. I want everything to have a story. There's the story. Nobody else ever knew that story.
Except for listeners of this podcast and people who have read the things that Jim Korkis has written about the subject.
And that's the unfortunate thing, is that when you say it, Jim, and we're sitting out here, looking at the two hotels, it makes perfect sense. You understand that story. But, unlike the other themed resorts that are themed to a location or a place or a time, like the Boardwalk, where it's very visible to guests, that story isn't visible. What was the expectation for guests to be able to interpret that, or was there ever none?
Well, and again, the feeling was you didn't have to hit guests over the head. They would just be immersed in that experience, and they would know. For instance, they would know that outside dolphin fountain, with the dolphin fillets, is supposed to be the entrance to the dolphin. In fact, that's supposed to be the porte cochere. And people say, but no, everybody parks the cars, and that's the back of the building, because when you go into a resort, where's the registration desk? On your right-hand side. When you come in from where you've parked your cars, registration desk is on the left, unless you've come in from where the dolphin fountain, outside dolphin fountain is, and you go in, and there it is on the right-hand side. You see all of the decorations, like that big thing, so you think you're in the I Dream of Genie bottle there, or in a hot air balloon. No, that's supposed to be a cabana. And we'll see, as we saw today, because the three of us walked the entire area again to take a look, because there's been some changes since the rehab in 2002. But some of those items are still there to indicate that these are cabana. And we even see that in the walkway from the dolphin to the swan. We see that cabana feel. And when they opened, that was even greater because the carpets had seashells on them and water, and the doors to each of the room looked like a cabana room. And so basically, to answer your question, Lou, people were just supposed to would just feel this, would just be immersed in this. But since the cast members didn't know this story, they couldn't communicate this story. They couldn't behave as if they were in that story. And so people took a look and said, well, this looks pretty garish, you know?
And the story is so abstract. It's not like that you can see a volcano or that you can even understand. I mean, people even ask the question, that doesn't look like a dolphin, that looks like a fish. Well, it is a dolphin fish. It is not the mammal. But people just don't get it, and I can see why. And I would not get it without Jim's explanation.
No, and I've stayed here dozens of times, and I've been to the resort many times and eaten at the restaurants inside. And until you mentioned the cabana, I didn't understand what I had been seeing, and then I had that aha moment, like, yes, I see it now. And that's why I've described this resort to people as it's not a Disney-themed resort. It's very much, it gives you a resort-type feel. So if you want to come to Walt Disney World and get away from the Pop Century theming or the Caribbean beach theming, it gives you that type of feel. And now I understand why it is that way, because you do feel as though you are in a cabana, and you see it both in the exterior and interior design as well.
And going on what Werner just was saying about the dolphins there, I was trying to get my thoughts organized here, is Michael Graves didn't want to use anything that was already in the Disney mythology, any of the Disney characters, whatever. He wanted to create his own mythology and then fold that into the Disney mythology. So he looked through books and classic tales and all that, which is why he came up with the dolphin and the swan, even though he keeps claiming that, yes, this is the tropical paradise and this is Florida, so it should be alligators or manatees or flamingos, and actually that'd probably be pretty cute with the alligator and the tail curved in the air and all of that. And the dolphin doesn't look like a dolphin because, as Werner said, this is the classic dolphin. You can see examples of this. This is based on the work of the Italian sculptor Bernini. And in fact, if you're at the Italian pavilion at Epcot, you'll notice there's the Neptune fountain, and they have two dolphins there that are exactly the same, with one change. And Michael Graves shared this. He says, well, you see the difference in the dolphins up there, and I'm going, yeah, that's awfully hard, and I'm squinting, I'm turning my eye. And he says, take a look at the mouth. He says, the traditional dolphin, the lips curve down. Michael Eisner said that is not going to happen on Disney property, so I had to curve the lips of the dolphin up. But, you know, these both resorts, as you mentioned earlier, have spawned so many urban myths, urban legends, and I know Werner's written about these.
Well, let's start with the one that I think is best known and that many people still believe, which is that, you know, those black boxes on the front of the Swan and Dolphin? Those are not rooms. Those are areas that can be knocked out. They're just temporary covers so that the monorail can go through. And that's how it was originally designed, for the monorail to go through. And usually the people who get the blame for that are some of the friendship captains who run the boats between the resorts here on the Crescent Lake and Epcot. And it's a wonderful story, and people want to believe the monorail will be expanded, and they want to believe that there's a reason why there's a black box on the front of each of the hotels. And there is a reason, and the reason is because Michael Graves wanted a black box on the front of each hotel. It was part of a look that he was doing on a lot of his buildings. These were large buildings. He didn't like big blank buildings, you know, the big modern building that just goes on and on forever with window after window. He wanted to break it up the same way that classical architecture, or I should say architecture like of the early 20th century, would have rows of colonnades and other features on it to break up the different stories. He would put these boxes on the fronts of buildings. He did another hotel shortly after this one, the Hyatt Regency at Aventine in La Jolla, California. It has 3 black boxes on the front of it. But, you know, there were never any plans for 3 monorails to go through La Jolla, all ending up at that hotel. And there were never plans for the monorail to go through the hotel here either. And in fact, if you look up at the hotel from where we're sitting, well, we can get a somewhat obstructive view of the Swan, not quite as good a view of the black box here on the Dolphin, but they're at completely different heights and they're different sizes. And if you start really thinking about a lot of things like where do the elevators go in the buildings, and would you really want to cut off the elevators? You think about, why does, I mean, I think on the Dolphin it's like 9 stories tall, the black box. If you really wanted to knock out 9 stories of rooms, why would you do that? And in fact, are there rooms behind there? One version of the rumor said, oh no, it's just a fake facade. It's just an empty space back there. But, at night you look up there and you see people up in those rooms. You see some drapes open and some drapes closed and lights on in a bunch of rooms. So either they've got animatronics up there acting as though they're hotel guests, all just for show, or it is what it really is. Those are just rooms and it just happens to be a different color on the front of the building. But it's a good story and one that many people believe.
And even if you look at the buildings closely, the width of the building itself wouldn't even accommodate the monorail beams in a station.
Absolutely. And again, this is what Imagineers like to call logical erroneous conclusion. And this happens all the time with Disney fans when they don't know the story, they don't know the background. And it happens with cast members too, whether it's the friendship boat drivers or bus drivers or whatever. None of them are malicious. They're all well-meaning, but without knowing the story, they put together a couple of things and say, well, this is logical, this makes sense. And of course, there was always talk about extending the monorail out here, just as there was talk of extending the monorail out to Disney Animal Kingdom because people were having difficulty that seemed far away on property and have a ticket and transportation center at the studios. In fact, I helped out years ago with a focus group at the studios where they brought in Disney guests, and they said, if we extended the monorail, would you be willing to buy a monorail pass? So instead of the monorail being free, you'd have to have a monorail pass to use it. And what would be the uppermost cost that you would feel comfortable paying in order to use that, to help, expand the monorail? So you take that idea of, well, they're thinking of getting the monorail. Oh, where would it go? Oh, there's where it would go. That makes absolute perfect sense. No, it does not. And just as it doesn't make sense that the icons were switched, right, Werner?
Well, that's the other big urban legend, and the story goes like this. Look at the Swan Hotel. By the way, the Swan is the Westin Hotel. It's no longer the Crown Plaza that I was referring to much earlier. And if you look at that hotel, it has ocean waves and seashells on it, but there are swans on top. And then if you look at the other hotel, the Dolphin, it has these banana leaves on it and grasses, and clearly there's only one explanation for that. The swans and the dolphins were switched. The helicopter pilot who was lifting them into the place accidentally put them on the wrong building. That the dolphin was supposed to be on the building with the waves because dolphins live in the sea, and the swans were supposed to be on the building with the grasses because swans live on the land, or I guess they float on the water or whatever. But again, it's a good story, and it's not at all true. Going back to the story that Jim was telling earlier about Michael Graves' whole backstory for these hotels, clearly the swans and dolphins figured exactly into the stories of the hotels in which they were built. But again, it just sounds so good that the helicopter pilot messed up, and it would have been too expensive to move them at that point, so they switched the names.
Right, and the way it was told to me by a very enthusiastic cast member when I was stuck on a friendship boat during a lightning storm was that, they had, just as they were placing the last one down, somebody finally looked down at the architectural blueprints and went, wait a minute, hold on a second. These are backwards. Nobody's looked at the plans until now. We got to, and they said, oh, it's just too expensive. Just leave them there, and it'll be okay.
And of course, helicopters weren't involved at all. These are cranes that are being used to begin with, and these are tremendously heavy. In fact, Michael Graves sculpted small models which were then digitized and all that. They actually had to go to a boat builder to twist the things into that shape, and then you cover it over. It's hollow inside each one of those, and there's stairways, for maintenance. And for instance, even on the Swans, the wings are the highest point on that building, so there's a lightning rod in there to get that. But as you were pointing out today, too, Werner, even the story that Michael Graves told me doesn't cover everything, because you take a look at the bottom of the Dolphin and you see sort of the image of a bridge and portholes, and so how does that fit into the story of an island? And there's all of this. And yes, there are rooms behind the black box, but interestingly enough, if you go high enough above that black box, there's about 80 feet where on the outside they've done windows so it looks like fake rooms, but there's nothing inside. And of course, since Michael Eisner hadn't seen any of these plans, he just heard these great visions by Michael Graves. As this was being built and all this, he's standing in that space that's 80 feet high, and there's Alan Lapidus, and there's Michael Graves, and there's Eisner, and Eisner says, well, what are you intending to do with all of this? And Michael Graves looked at him and said, well, Michael, this is going to be your apartment. And Michael Eisner said nothing. And again, that was Graves's sense of humor there. And of course, one of the wonderful stories, and we'll put this so that Lou can cut this if he wants, because, no, I've had that experience. I want people to know that I absolutely love Disney. I do. You can love the Disney brand and still have some questions or challenges about how the Disney business operates. But anytime I say anything where Disney may have made a misstep, people write in and go, Lou, you should hang that guy up. You're becoming one of those podcasts, Lou. But when the Dolphin was dedicated, when it was opened in 1990, it was the same year that Dick Tracy was released. So there was a big party out here, and all the stars were out here. And so in the lobby, Alan Lapidus was standing with Michael Eisner, and someone came rushing down, and Mr. Eisner, we have a huge problem. Warren Beatty is complaining that there's a mouse in his room. And Alan Lapidus explained, well, this is not unusual. When you're doing constructions, it's not unusual for a field mouse or even a family of field mice to take up residence, even just after it was built. In fact, the same thing happened at Disneyland. And so Michael Eisner turned to the guy and said, take an exterminator up there right away. And Alan Lapidus said, now, wait a minute, Michael. Do you see the irony that you're sending an exterminator up there to kill a mouse? And he said, Michael didn't see the humor in that.
I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things we went over as far as the interior design, because I think it's something that, again, is overlooked. But we were talking about the monorails and the black box. It made me think of another urban legend that is one that continues to rear its head every year, which again is about that expansion of the monorail, whether it's to Animal Kingdom, to the studios, to Beastly Kingdom, wherever it is that it's going. And I said, well, they couldn't do it because it would be $1 million a mile. And that very much is untrue, because I think Disney wishes it was only $1 million a mile.
If they could add if $10 million would buy 10 miles of new monorail, they would have jumped at the opportunity. I don't have the numbers in front of me of what the Las Vegas monorail cost, but it was several $100 million a mile. And that's using the same technology, the same Bombardier technology that, in fact, Bombardier bought from the Disney companies as part of the transition so that Bombardier could build the new monorail trains for Walt Disney World, the ones that are currently running.
And speaking of the monorail too, I remember there's also a story that many DVC members talk about, which is about the monorail being extended out to Disney's Saratoga Springs Resort, and that was a place that they've already been told, yeah, there's a good chance a monorail may be coming by. There may be actually some truth to that urban legend.
Well, there's actually a reason why people can legitimately have that belief. There's a bunch of paperwork that people have to sign when they buy any sort of a timeshare, including Disney Vacation Club. And among it is what are the easements through the property, and where are the rights limited and such. And well, it turns out there is a monorail easement through Saratoga Springs. But that doesn't mean that there's going to be a monorail built. It means that sometime decades before Saratoga Springs was built, somebody was planning where would the monorail easements be on property should the monorail ever be extended to those places. And in fact, on my website, I have a picture of a model that shows monorail and apparently people mover track going around downtown Disney. Going through the Saratoga Springs would have been the same line that would have gone through Saratoga Springs. But I certainly don't expect to see that in my lifetime or in my children's lifetime or anybody's lifetime.
And I think the Las Vegas monorail was about $654 million for just over 4 miles, to sort of put it in context. So you're looking at...
And I think it's slightly comparing apples to oranges because things like land acquisition and those things are different.
And the land itself.
And the land itself here, though. Here it's probably, some of the supports might actually cost more, whereas land acquisition might cost less. But we're still talking about something that's $50, $100, $200 million a mile, not $1 million a mile.
Yeah, they're still looking for some of the pilings that they sunk over by the Contemporary.
Yeah, and when it comes to transportation, it was never Walt's vision that there would be a fleet of Mears buses on property. You know, even when I've been doing an awful lot of research on the opening of Walt Disney World because we're celebrating the 40th, and a lot of people don't realize that when Walt Disney World opened, when the Magic Kingdom opened, primarily you were taking the monorail over there. You didn't have those big steamships. There were little ferries that were hustled into service by Dick Nunis, and there were parking lot trams that were going to take you around, but they kept overheating and breaking down and all of that. But basically, Walt's philosophy was that you wouldn't need your own car on property. That was the whole foundation of his original concept of Epcot, in which they were trying to do with the Magic Kingdom. But, you know, we've been talking so long here, and those of you who are just listening can't see how nervous and anxious Lou is, because he has these hands on these plungers for us to implode the Walt Disney World Dolphin and Swan. And I told him, you have to get the official approval for that, Lou. You know, imploding is not as easy as you might think.
I'm actually not the one that wants to implode it. I enjoy these resorts. I talk about, I think they are in a great location. I think they offer some wonderful amenities and things like that. And I want to talk a little bit more about the theming inside, because they are often referred to by people. The internet is an amazing thing, because we all have a voice now, and in online discussion forums for years, people have been talking about how the Swan and Dolphin lack theming. You've certainly established that the theming takes place outside. I want to talk about the theming inside, but the rumor that you're referring to is not one that I certainly want to implode, but there is a rumor that brings itself up on forums quite often, is that when this mysterious contract with the hotel managers runs out, that Disney is planning on imploding the Swan and Dolphin and building real Disney-themed hotels there.
And that seems pretty unlikely, considering that these hotels were several $100 million. I want to say around $300 million when they were originally built. And in today's money, that would be a great deal more. So they represent huge investments. They really are pretty nice hotels. Now, we can argue about whether they're in the right place or not, or how well the story works, and whether Disney made a mistake or whether Eisner made a mistake in going with this and having such hotels built 20 years ago. But the fact is, they're here, they make money. Presumably they make money for Disney, because Disney gets money for being on Disney property, makes money for the hotel company, makes money for the chain affiliations, for the Starwood, Westin, and Sheraton brands. And so there doesn't seem to be nobody is in a hurry to implode these. And it's certainly not that Disney hates these hotels. And as we talked about earlier, Michael Eisner is the whole reason why these hotels were built.
I think a lot of people overlook these hotels because they think that they are quote-unquote not Disney hotels, again, because of that theming. And I think you hit on a point, which is it's not necessarily the hotels themselves, but sort of where they are, because if you're standing on the boardwalk, they almost seem like they're out of place with the entire theming of this area.
You're absolutely right, Lou. It impacted so many things. In fact, we even have a shop on the boardwalk that has waves on the top there, so it looks like the swan is resting on the waves. And of course, by being so high, it even affected World Showcase, because the back facades of the pavilions hadn't been done because nobody would see them. And now, with the introduction of that and the International Gateway, they had to redo the back facade of France, for instance, because when you're in the French pavilion, you see the Eiffel Tower in the distance, and it's a wonderful perspective illusion, and you just think, yeah, it goes all the way to the ground and all that. And here's a spoiler warning for people, so you can click out for a couple of seconds here. Those who have taken backstage tours or who have worked at Disney know that the Eiffel Tower is on top of the back building there. But again, you can see that now from the Dolphin. So they had to build up the facade and build up so it doesn't look like it's on top of the roof there. Also, the reason why this was outsourced, at least according to the Disney official line, is that Disney had not built any hotels in 15 years. And so we're unfamiliar with how does business operate now, how the whole process. And so Michael Eisner's belief was, if we have somebody else do this, we can watch and study how they do that, and then we can do it on our own, which is exactly what happened. And so after Swan and Dolphin, then you have this whole flood of wonderful hotels of Port Orleans and the Grand Floridian and all of these in the different ranges, and no reason to do that. And again, I agree with Werner. It would be unlikely for them to implode the buildings. And in fact, the Disney tradition has always been to try to reutilize the existing structure. So whether it's using the existing structure for World of Motion to do test track, and actually it probably would have been better if they had used an entire one, or you use the existing structure of Dream Flight, for Buzz Light Ranger spin there, Lightyear Ranger spin, Space Ranger spin. So the tradition was, let's use the space that exists, and how can we reformat that? So those who are out there hoping that there'll be a cloud of dust and the dolphins and swans will be on Disney auction on eBay, may have to wait just a while for that to happen.
Well, part of why I wanted to do this was because I hope that people get a new understanding and appreciation of what they're seeing, maybe walk through the resorts and understand what that story is. And just real quick, because we've talked a lot about Michael Eisner, and for a lot of people, it's easy to remember the bad things that happen, the bad legacy that somebody leaves behind. But, it's important because we talk about how everything has a story, and that, too, you need to sort of attribute to the fact that was one thing that Michael Eisner made sure he wanted to happen, even in these buildings that for many people they don't think tells a story. Tell us about some of the theming and the story that takes place inside.
Okay, and again, I'd like to give a shout out to Michael Eisner. I think in the last years he became toxic to the company, but in the beginning, I think a lot of people forget that he really was the knight in shining armor that was rescuing, the Disney princess. And the thing with Michael is he had dozens of ideas. An ABC executive who worked with him said, yes, Michael will come in with 100 ideas, 99 of them don't make sense. Like, let's take all the furniture and nail it to the ceiling. Well, why, Michael? Well, it'll be different, But the one idea he has was amazing. And so when Frank Wells was around, there was that balance. Because when Michael Eisner was first talking about hotels, he envisioned a Mickey Mouse hotel straddling Buena Vista there. And there'd be rooms in the legs, and there'd be elevators in the legs. And you'd drive underneath Mickey Mouse. And it was Frank Wells who said, Michael, you realize all these drivers are going to be looking up at Mickey's crotch. And it was Michael Eisner who said, why don't we have Winnie the Pooh toilet seats? See, Pooh toilet seats. And it was Wells who stepped in and said, no, we have a certain brand and a certain character integrity, and we shouldn't be looking at, this year's profit or next year's profit or even 5 years, but for the long run. Frank Wells was that wonderful, wonderful balance there for it. Now, the interior of both of these resorts that you wanted to talk about, originally they were done by Michael Graves as well. So he came up with the designs for the restaurants and for the rooms, and there's paintings that he's done. In fact, today we discovered a giant one signed by him in 1990 when the resort opened. And again, as we alluded to, it was going to be a cabana experience. You were going to be out in the tropics here, so the carpets would have shells on them and water wiggles, and the doors would look like a cabana door, and all of the decorations you have. Even when you come into the Dolphin today, from the back of the Dolphin where you park, you'll see pictures of fish and all of that floating along there. So it was all more cohesive.
Even the gift shop in the Swan is called Cabanas.
Absolutely. And the other thing that Michael Graves instituted, which as we walked around today, we see has pretty much been gutted, although there are remnants of that. His philosophy is there were going to be two differences between the Dolphin and the Swan, and it wasn't just in terms of size. In the Dolphin, where things were three-dimensional, you couldn't touch them. So the interior fountain, Dolphin Fountain in the lobby there, yes, it almost looks like you can touch, but if you reach out, you absolutely cannot. So things that are three-dimensional you can't touch, but things that are two-dimensional. And so, for instance, we find the cutouts along the bottom floor there, too, of the curtains for the cabana, and they're two-dimensional cutouts there. And then when you come outside, you see the Dolphin Fountain, which was going to be much, much larger because the dolphins were going to be three-dimensional. But Michael Eisner said, we can't see the Swan, so you've got to get rid of those dolphins or whatever. So Graves said he made them into dolphin fillets. And so by making them two-dimensional, the fountain actually became smaller, and as we saw today, you could literally sit on the edge there and reach out. You could touch one of those dolphins. Now, the opposite was going to be true in the Swan. Where things are three-dimensional, you can touch them. So the Swan Fountain in there, and again, we walked in there and saw that today. You can sit on the edge, you can reach out, you can touch that three-dimensional swan. Maybe we should start an urban legend that you have to rub that for good luck or something. There's an urban legend I just found out that the mural in Cinderella's castle, you're supposed to rub the glass slipper in memory of all the Disney cast members long gone. I'd never heard that before. So you can start any legend you want. Also in the restaurants and in there, and we see they've been removed, but some of the listeners might remember that, they had two-dimensional figures like monkeys and parrots and all that, but they were out of reach. They were up in the air. So again, they were going to be the reverse. Also in the Swan, it was designed to confuse you because, again, you're coming there for conventions. So Michael Graves says we want people to think out of the box. So when you come in, instead of the registration desk on the right, it's on the left. You're in this huge area, this huge covered area, and you can't tell which way to go. Clearly, where is your room? You know, there's no point of reference. You can't see down the hall to where you're going to go. Whereas at the Swan, it's more linear. The registration desk is on the right. The aisleways are perpendicular and they're shorter, so it's clearer to see. But since the redo in 2002, since nobody knew any of this, you can change anything you want because you don't realize it's affecting other things that are going on.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important that you guys are able to help convey these stories, both about the history, to clear up confusion I think that people have about the genesis of the resorts. Credit given where it's due to the people who helped make it happen and understand its connection to where it is now and even Epcot Center in the distance. Again, understanding the theming will hopefully make people go and visit and appreciate the resorts even more. So Jim Korkis, you can hear him on the show all the time. He's a frequent contributor to Celebrations magazine.
Buy his book.
Don't forget don't buy his book. Buy 2 copies of his book. The Vault of Walt. I'll put a link in this week's show notes. You can also check it out at Amazon.com. And of course, Werner Weiss from Yesterland.com. Wonderful site, especially if you're into Disney theme park history. He's got some amazing articles and photos you're not going to find anywhere else. And I want to thank both of you guys for coming out today and joining me on the boardwalk, touring the Swan and the Dolphin with me.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun, and I agree. Buy Jim's book. It's a terrific book. And check Yesterland every Friday. There's a new article.
And yes, I'm available for bar mitzvahs and birthday party clowning and all of that. Lou, it's an absolute pleasure. I hope that all of your listeners get a chance to meet you in person. You're a magnificent person. Thank you for keeping the magic alive and the stories alive.
Guys, thanks so much.
Thank you, Lou, and again, thanks for all you do.
Imagination, a dream can be a dream come true.
That's going to do it for this week's show. Thanks so much for taking the time and tuning in this and every week. Hope you enjoyed our look at the history and the stories of the Walt Disney World Swan and Dolphin. If so, come by and share your thoughts and comments and feedback over on the show notes over at WDWRadio.com. Also want to say big thanks to my friend Jim Korkis. You can find more of his great work and some of those stories behind the stories in every issue of Celebrations magazine. You could also visit this week's show notes and get a link over to buy his book, The Vault of Walt, over on Amazon.com. You can find Werner Weiss's great history of Disneyland, other Disney parks, including Walt Disney World, over at yesterland.com. I'll put links to everything over in this week's show notes over at WDWRadio.com. While you're on the site, be sure and check out our blog, our Disney Book Club. We have a chat with Ridley Pearson coming up this Wednesday night. Come by, talk and meet with other Disney fans in our fun, free, friendly discussion forums. And check out some of our new videos posted every week as well. I mentioned our live chat with author Ridley Pearson coming up this Wednesday night at 7:30 over at WDWRadioLive.com. And be sure and join us every Wednesday night at 7:30 for the WDW Newscast, a live interactive discussion about this week's Walt Disney World news. I do a video broadcast you can watch and chat real time in the chat room and be part of the conversation. If you can't make it live, you can check it out on YouTube at youtube.com/WDW Radio or on the WDW Radio blog. And you can also get the audio-only portion of the newscast in the WDW Radio iTunes feed as well. Also, while you're on the site, be sure and check out the WDW Radio shop, where you can get signed copies of my Walt Disney World trivia books, my audio guides to Walt Disney World on CD, and lots more. There you'll also find a link over to iTunes, where you can download the free WDW Radio iPhone app and the all-new Walt Disney World Trivia app with more than 750 questions, descriptive answers, hundreds of additional Did You Know facts and figures, lots more. Again, the link is right on the site, where you can also just search for WDW Trivia in iTunes. If you like either or both of the apps, we'd really appreciate it if you can rate and review them while you're in iTunes as well. Be sure and check out DisneyMeets.com for upcoming Meets of the Month in Walt Disney World, including next week in Japan for Japan. It's going to be Saturday, June 11th. We're going to meet in Japan in World Showcase. Also going to start doing some fundraising for the Japanese earthquake relief. Stay tuned to the show, Twitter, Facebook, and the WDW Radio blog for more information. And also be sure and visit DisneyMeets.com for information about upcoming events in and out of Walt Disney World, including the Pacific Northwest Mouse Meet on June 25th, D23 coming this summer. We will be back at the expo once again this summer in the Collectors Forum, but if you can't make it out there, we're going to have full live coverage and lots of surprises and more. You can check it out over at D23Live.com. There we'll post updates, and you can also check out some videos from the last D23 Expo in 2009. Quick thanks to my partners and sponsors, including MouseFan Travel. They are my official and recommended travel provider. Look, Becky and her team gives you not only the best possible personal service that you would come to expect, but also the best prices and discounts on your Walt Disney World, Disneyland, Disney Cruise Line, or Adventures by Disney vacation. If you're coming to Walt Disney World, maybe you want something a little more space, a kitchen, multiple master bedrooms, your own private pool, spa, game rooms, lots more. Check out All-Star Vacation Homes and their 2-bedroom condos up to 7-bedroom luxury homes. Again, just within a couple of miles of Walt Disney World. And while you're in Disney, be sure and head to downtown Disney and check out Bongo's Cuban Cafe for lunch or dinner. They've got indoor, outdoor seating, 3 bars, an express window, live music and dancing on Friday and Saturday night, and of course, great cuisine as well. You can also visit them online at bongoscubancafe.com. And finally, when you're staying in Walt Disney World, be right in the heart, walking distance to Epcot and Disney's Hollywood Studios over at the Swan and Dolphin. I love not only the heavenly beds,
but the restaurants and lounges and Blue Zoo and Peekaboo and the pool and did I mention Blue Zoo? Again, check them out over at swananddolphin.com. Of course, I love hearing from you guys, so if you have a question you want me to answer on the show, you can email me at lou@wdwradio.com, or if you want to be heard on the air, call the voicemail toll-free at 888-703-2171. Again, lots more coming for the show, for the newscast, and a few other projects I'm working on as well. Looking forward to sharing those with you. One thing we just finished was issue 18 of Celebrations magazine. That will be mailing out in July, so if you're looking to subscribe, be sure and do it before June 9th in order to start your subscription with the next issue. For more information to subscribe or order back issues, visit celebrationspress.com. And as always, my friends, and you are my friends, whether we have met yet or not, if you like the show, all I ask is that you please help spread the word. Let others know about it. Your friends, your family, tweet out that you're listening. Share the link on Facebook. Please come by, review the show and the apps over in iTunes. And remember that you can follow your dreams and do what you love each and every day. So take those first steps towards pursuing your passion. And once you do, always, always keep moving forward. I hope you have a great, great week, everybody. See ya.
Hi, Lou. This is Jen Tremley from Bristol, Connecticut. Just wanted to leave you a quick voicemail and say that I just finished listening to show number 222 this week with part 2 of your Jeff Curdy interview. And I just wanted to say I appreciated the show. I enjoyed it very much, and I'm looking forward to reading some of Jeff's books that I did get at my local library. And I didn't even know, but I already have the Disney Welcome Aboard book that I ended up getting as a promotion, and didn't even realize that he was the author of it. So when he mentioned that on the interview, I was very pleased to see that I do already own that book, and I was able to enjoy his drawings and just the whole artist rendition of the boat itself, even though I've never been on the Disney Dream. I hope that I will be able to at some day. But anyway, I just wanted to call and say hi. Hope everybody has a great week, and I'm just counting down the days to my Disney trip in September. Talk to you later.
Hey, Lou. This is Joey, Navy Mouse on the forum. Just got back from Walt Disney World, and just wanted to give you a highlight of exciting part of my trip. I auditioned for and made it on the show for American Idol. And even though I didn't win my show, it was just such a blast. Cast members were great in helping us, the performers, feel comfortable and make sure we have fun. And, you know, the audience was great and cheering for all the performers and booing the one judge who would say nasty comments. And even after I performed, you know, people would come up to me and say, hey, I voted for you. And even the next day in the Magic Kingdom, someone came up to me like, hey, I voted for you. You did a great job. So it was just a fantastic experience that I could only got at Disney World. And I encourage anyone who has any kind of singing talent to audition. You know, it's such a blast. So thanks, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Hey, Lou. This is the Stevens family from Colorado. Actually, I'm solo on this trip. Traveling cross country, heading back to Colorado right now. But one of my stops was in Dayton, Ohio. I stopped to see Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the Air Force Museum, and I was somewhat surprised. There's a display in there dedicated to Walt Disney in the World War II section. It is really well done, and it focuses on the development, design, production of military units, squadron, company, whatever, unit patches. You know, things he did. Tough times for the studio back then. All the Snow White money was pretty much spent and nothing else was really coming in. But as Walt said, although this took up a tremendous amount of time, money, resources, animators, because he did the whole thing. He did the coordination, design, production, development. As he said, I guess due to his noblesse oblige, how could he say no? It's well done. There's narrative, there's audio-visual, there's a lot of things to look at. And there's a lot of film clips there that are original back in the studio showing Walt and his animators putting this thing together. Very surprised, and I'd recommend it to anybody who's a Disney fan. Also, interesting to note, my first operational assignment when I was in the Air Force was at the 309th TAC Fighter Squadron. Their call sign was a Wild Duck, and what was on their patch? Donald Duck. I still have a number of those. I can send one on to you if you might have an interest in that. Well, the next stop is on to Marceline, and when I get out of there, I'll give you a report on that. I expect that's going to be kind of a pilgrimage for me and kind of a moving experience. Hey, Luke, take care. Thanks for all you do, and take care, my friend. Goodbye.
You've got a friend.